talking CRYPTID. Now this is a movie directed and written by Brad Rago, and it's kind of an old-fashioned movie that reminds me a lot of Kolchak the Night Stalker. If you're unfamiliar with Kolchak, think maybe the X-Files. It has this kind of old-fashioned feel to it where the bulk of the movie is really the kind of the investigation, because our main character Max is an investigative reporter trying to uncover the mystery of what's kind of going on, ultimately with the reveal and kind of the confrontation at the end. So it kind of plays a little bit like, as I say, an older movie, maybe kind of a 70s movie, but particularly, as I say, it reminds me of things like Kolchak in the way that it's kind of the movie is told. It is a modern movie. It does take place in kind of a, you know, modern America, but it just has that sort of old-fashioned feel to it to a certain degree. In actual fact, it does almost feel like a pilot for a TV show in some respects, because they used to make these things, you know, these kind of telly movies that were sometimes backdoor pilots in case it was particularly popular, then they could kind of spin it off. And that's kind of what it feels like. But let me just go into a little bit more about what the actual kind of story is all about. So as I say, it focuses on this character called Max, who is like a freelance reporter, and we have this kind of like a secondary character who is this kind of photographer, kind of co-worker, this kind of female like photography reporter, I guess. And the pair of them discover that there may well be a undiscovered species living in this kind of undergrowth, which could be a killer that is killing the kind of the local townsfolk, animals alike, and is some type of reptilian creature which we haven't seen since, you know, obviously, well, we've never seen. It's been long thought extinct, and it's now kind of evolved to kind of obviously deal with deforestation and things like that. So there's a little bit of an eco message with this one as well. And it is, of course, now killing this kind of local townsfolk, and of course no one believes these reporters, and they are, for the most part of this movie, uncovering the facts, finding evidence, trying to find out what exactly this thing or things are, to obviously warn the local townsfolk with the inevitable kind of confrontation at the end. So let's talk about what I think works in this movie. So if you like a kind of an old-fashioned sort of style monster movie where the bulk of the running time is more of the kind of like the shuffling papers, talking to witnesses, looking at the evidence and that sort of thing, unravelling clues, then I think maybe you'll kind of enjoy that. Now there is an audience for that. I mean, like I've said, these Kolchak was a kind of a cult hit for a reason, and I do think there's that a portion of the audience that doesn't necessarily want to see lots of kind of like on-screen monsters and kills and stuff. They want to have more of a cerebral film. You know, I don't know if I would necessarily call this movie cerebral exactly, but it's certainly more of a, you know, finding out evidence and clues and finding out more information. It's kind of peppered in as the film progresses. So, you know, it has that interesting element of reveals as the kind of the film goes on. We as the audience will learn more about this thing as our characters do on screen at the kind of the same time, and you know, we kind of go on that sort of journey with them. I have to say, I quite like the cast here. You know, they're understated roles. The character of Max is somewhat of a kind of an understated character. He's not particularly kind of a flashy character. He hasn't got like a big personality or anything like that. There's not really any kind of inflated kind of drama, but I have to say I kind of liked it. I kind of like his kind of more understated performance of this guy who just kind of wants to get the job done. And even I like the fact that we have this friendship between a male and female reporter, but there really isn't any type of underlying kind of romance there. It's just they are co-workers who kind of get on and support each other, which I kind of liked. I thought that was it. It's a nice, refreshing change not to have kind of inflated drama. There is a little bit of backstory about, you know, previous kind of tragedies and things like this, and there's a smattering of the characters that will come kind of weave in and out of the kind of the story as it kind of goes along. But I gotta say, I thought, although I wouldn't say that anyone here is particularly flashy in the role, everyone did a good, grounded, understated performance. So I think with somewhat kind of believable characters to a point. I mean, the script I don't think helps sometimes, but we'll come on to that. I think the performances were kind of quite solid though. And there are some sequences here when regards this kind of creature where I do think it's quite effective. And this thing seems to burrow underground and kind of, you know, emerge from this kind of like almost like potholes to kind of come out and attack. And there are some pretty good kind of sequences where I feel, because you're not quite sure what you're looking at, you know, you're not quite sure really until the very kind of final act of the movie, really, and even then the kind of the latter half of that, about what this thing really is and what it kind of looks like. So you're kind of guessing for a good part of this movie. But there is still some effective sequences here where we see, you know, partial of the creature, its arms, its things like that, its kind of snout, to get an idea of maybe what it might be. And there is some effective kind of sequences that I think were done pretty well, I have to say. Now the movie is a slow pace, but I do feel it has enough kind of going on to keep you interested. There's enough kind of like a development in the plot where I feel even though it is slow, I mean, there is still enough going on just about, I think, to hold your interest. I do think it could be punchier, and I do think it's a little long for its own good, but I think I was kind of still engaged with the movie. I didn't find this movie unengaging at any point, even though I do feel it could have been a little bit more punchy in regards to things like runtime, which I'll come on to in a minute. But then I thought it was a solidly made kind of like a mystery, you know, what the hell's kind of going on. It kind of was like a two-parter of a, as I say, like a Kolchak kind of style monster kind of like hunt ultimately. So if you're a fan of that, I think you'll kind of enjoy it. You'll like the practical effects. You know, it's relatively kind of like well shot. There's kind of some underground sequences I thought were kind of quite well done and things like that. And it does kind of leave the door open, so to speak. So what doesn't work? So as I've kind of alluded to, the movie is a little bit long for its own good. I think it's just about engaging enough, but I think it could have been punchier because ultimately, you know, it's a nearly 2-hour film. I don't really think it needed to be that long because even though I think there's just about enough there to keep you interested, it didn't really kind of like need to have a lot of these kind of extended sequences in there, to be honest with you. And it could have ultimately become, I think, a little bit more of a slicker film had it been a little bit more kind of like, you know, truncated, to be honest with you. It didn't need to be quite as a slow burn as this. There wasn't enough really going on to warrant this kind of like slower kind of pace and longer maybe running time than it kind of needed to be honest. I do feel there's some script issues here. I mean, there's what we uncover is a mountain of evidence, but our characters never really seem to be taken particularly kind of seriously. And I know that there's even specifics which I won't mention because it's going to be spoiling. Well, I think they have some pretty kind of compelling evidence, and yet they kind of go, no one's going to believe us, things like that. And even you know, we have a scene or two where they do present it, and there's like, no. I was like, well, I don't know. It kind of feels like, you know, this is not like some supernatural thing where you can't really explain it. You have clear evidence and stuff like that. I feel, you know, had there been real experts brought on and things like this, you can kind of you would see it would have been a little bit more kind of realistic, I think, in its writing. And that's why I say, even though I think this movie is a slower burn and is a kind of a mystery, and it wants to be more of a cerebral film, it isn't. I don't think it doesn't quite get there because some of the kind of like the script ends up being a little bit on the dumber side, I think, from time to time. The creature itself, they wisely kind of keep it hidden for the majority of the film. I have to say, when it's revealed, it looks a lot like the Gorn from Star Trek, the original series. You know, I appreciate the practical effects, and there are a couple of sequences where we see the creature effects where I do feel they kind of look fairly kind of okay, but there's a lot where it kind of looks a bit hokey, if I'm completely honest with you. There are a couple of characters that just seem to be you don't quite know what's happened to them, is the best way to describe it. I won't go into details, but they think, well, what happened to this character? It just seems to edit into a cut, and it's like, well, you know, either a character just seems to disappear, or we have a character, something happens to them, and we never really kind of, it's a little bit too much of a hard cut, kind of like to sort of show you. And then again, there's just a few elements here that I think are a little bit on the sillier side, which kind of unfortunately detracts from what otherwise is a little bit more of a, it tries to be at least a little bit more of a thoughtful film. It just doesn't kind of quite, you know, this maybe needed another writer, and maybe someone who had a little bit more kind of like either, experience with creatures or something to do with law enforcement and things like that. It could have been had another rewrite where it's kind of tighten up some of these kind of more sillier aspects, because ultimately I think this movie doesn't want to be a big movie. It's a slower burn kind of creature feature with a kind of an old-fashioned kind of style, but it just kind of ends up being a little hokey at times ultimately. But I do think there's an audience for this. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's a watchable movie, and I appreciate the kind of the time it takes to kind of like get you to kind of buy into the characters. I thought the character work here was okay outside of a few clunkers that the script doesn't have, but the actors do a good job, and I think at least the personal kind of relationships I felt were strong. And there is an interesting mystery that involves this kind of creature and kind of what it actually is and what its kind of patterns are and things like that. It doesn't completely hit the mark on those kind of things, to be honest, but it's a watchable film if you don't mind that. But I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's kind of an average sort of film to me. It feels very much like a television pilot, but it's one that I don't know would get picked up because there's not really enough kind of going on necessarily. So it's a 5 out of 10. If you like this kind of thing, please do let me know if you've seen it and what your thoughts are, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.